So I'm going to tell you the story behind my Balkan Noir series. I wanted to set a crime novel in Belgrade for a long time. It's a fascinating city and one that I love very much, and I have a lot of connections to it. My son is half Serbian, my ex-wife is Serbian, my ex-girlfriend is Serbian, and I lived there in the mid to late 90s. Now, Belgrade in the 90s was a crazy place. The Yugoslav war had finished, NATO bombing was about to happen, the West had imposed sanctions, and inflation was off the scale. So, as an example, people in the morning, what their salary was worth, by the time they finished work, it was literally worth nothing. So in this climate, the only thing which could work was crime and the black market. One of the most notorious criminals, or war hero, as many see him, is a guy called Arkan. Now, as you can see from the photo, he's holding a tiger cub, and his military unit were called Arkan's Tigers. An American photographer took this photo, and Arkan loved it so much he said that the photographer could accompany his men during the war. When the same photographer took a photo of Arkan's men shooting a Bosnian woman in the head, he said if he ever saw the photographer again, he would drink his blood. But Arkan was also a handsome, charming guy who stood up for Serbia and against the West, and bombing in particular. He was also married to Setsa. Now, Setsa is the most famous pop star in Serbia, maybe in the whole of the Balkans. Someone like Beyoncé is nothing compared to her. And they loved each other very much. So they were like this glamour couple of Belgrade for about 5 years until Arkan was assassinated. And the night before he was assassinated, the story goes, Setsa had a dream about her teeth falling out, which signified that someone close to her was going to die. And she urged him not to go out, but he did. And she was nearby when he was killed, and she kind of ran to him, and he ended up dying in her arms. So you had this kind of weird mix in Belgrade in the 90s of glamour and crime, and that was something that I kind of wanted to capture. Now, I was at a crime fiction festival where you could pitch your ideas to agents, and I was actually writing a psychological thriller, and I was trying to pitch this to agents, and they just weren't interested. So I changed my tune and I said, okay, look, what I really want to write about is a crime novel set in Belgrade about a police inspector who must fight corruption to keep his family alive. And the agents straight away were interested, so I thought, okay, this really is the book which I need to write. Now, a few different things happened at the same time. One of them was I met the Linguist with a bullet in her leg. We actually met in a park where both our sons were playing football, and it turned out that she was from Belgrade, and we basically fell in love at first sight, and she told me her story. So in the 90s in Belgrade, she'd been the girlfriend of quite a notorious drug dealer, and this ended in a police car chase with her getting shot in the leg. Now, the dealer was arrested and she was taken to hospital. When they operated, they couldn't get the bullet out, so to this day, it's still in her leg. She managed to kind of get out of that life, and she moved to Austria, where she got married and had a son. And then she was then in the UK as a mature student and going through a divorce, as I was at the time. Another thing which happened was that I got a research bursary from Literature Wales, and this gave me some time and money where I could kind of research the novel. So one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to go to Belgrade and I wanted to interview some police inspectors. Now, first of all, we asked my girlfriend's family, and they laughed. They said, okay, which Serbian police inspector is going to speak to some English guy? But I have a friend who's an author and publisher in Belgrade, so I asked him, and he said, okay, no worries. He had a friend, and his friend had a friend whose cousin was a police inspector. So me and my girlfriend, we flew over to Belgrade, and stayed with her family. And then we met my friend, and in kind of typical Serbian fashion, first of all we had a coffee, and then after the coffee we said okay, and we had some lunch, and after some lunch we had okay, we have some beer. There's a phrase in Serbian which is polako, polako, which just kind of means, it's a bit like tranquilo, it's like slowly, slowly. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm never going to meet this police inspector. But then suddenly my friend got a call. We jumped in his old Yugo and we went to this cafe where we met this police inspector. Now, understandably, this police inspector, who was quite young, was quite reluctant at the beginning to tell me things. But with my friend and my girlfriend sort of acting as translators, and I speak a bit of Serbian too, he started to tell me things. Now, one of the things he told me about was the Balkan drug route. Now, as you can see from the photo, the Balkan drug route, and we're talking about heroin here, starts in Afghanistan, which is where the poppies are grown and cultivated. From there, it goes through the Balkans into Western Europe. Now, calling it the Balkan drug route is actually a bit unfair because, I mean, the Balkans are just a transit route. It's Afghanistan where the poppies is turned into heroin, and it's the Western countries like Germany, France, UK, which are the main consumers. Now, after the Yugoslav war, the Balkan drug route sort of split into three. So you had east through Bulgaria, central through Serbia, and then south through Albania. One of the things I was really pleased to find out about was about Iver. Now, Iver is one of the most delicious things in the world. It's a sort of Serbian relish made from red peppers, garlic, and sometimes with aubergine. And because I'd watched a lot of sort of 70s crime films like French Connection, I imagined that these jars of Iver would be a way of transporting packets of heroin. And it turned out to be true. So the police inspector was telling me that when the heroin comes through the border of Macedonia, there's a lot of warehouses there which store Iver. And if the packets of heroin are in fact put into jars of Iver and then transported through Serbia. So I'm really happy about this because it became quite a sort of key part of the novel, of the plot. So I filled up a whole notebook of notes from this police inspector and came back to start writing. Now, at the same time as I was starting to write, I was also doing more research. And one of the documentaries I watched was a Serbian documentary from the 90s called See You in the Obituary. Now, it's just a 20-minute documentary, and all it does is interview criminals at the time. So it can seem quite sort of mundane, but by the end of the 20-minute documentary, almost everyone who'd been interviewed was dead. Now, one of the few survivors was this guy, Christian. And he was recently, in fact, as I was writing the book, was arrested in Belgrade Central Church for dealing heroin. However, he claimed in court that he didn't have enough money to support his family, and he had a TV contract to appear on The Farm. The Farm is a reality TV program like Big Brother, but on a farm. And so for the first year, instead of being in prison, he was basically on TV every day. And it's this kind of surreal element that I wanted to capture in the novel. So I plotted all the novel out with scenes and on index cards. I sat down, I wrote it, and I edited it. I got feedback, and then I set about finding a publisher. And the publisher that I came across, which I thought would be a great fit, was Fahrenheit Press. The guy behind Fahrenheit Press, Chris McVie, has his own story, having kind of come down from Scotland as a young man with like £10 in his pocket, and then he made it in the 90s by creating search engines for various publishers, and he then set up his own publishing company. So we met in a pub in London, and we got on, and I made a deal with him about publishing the Balkan Noir books. Now, at the same time as I was making a deal with Fahrenheit, my girlfriend was back in Austria, and she was back letting her past into her life. So obviously it's one thing to kind of be writing about crime, but being involved directly in it is very different. So we separated, which was very heartbreaking. And a month later, or a couple of months later, I got a phone call from a lawyer in Austria asking could I get her out of prison. This was a crazy story involving international cocaine dealing, prostitutes, in witness protection, and 3 months of tapped phone calls, including any call that my ex-girlfriend had with me. But out of love, I went over to Austria and I got her out of prison. Well, when I say I got her out, I paid a lawyer to get her out. And I made a deal with her. And I said, okay, if I'm getting you out of prison, then I'm turning your life into a thriller. So the two books which are out so far is The Balkan Route and The Woman with a Bullet in Her Leg. And then there's two more to come, which is The Clan and Balkan Warriors. And that's going to be my Balkan Noir series.